it is a great honor to introduce to you our keynote speaker for today. On September 24th, 2011, the New York Times printed a story about a company located in the tiny town of Warwood, Minnesota, 6 miles south of the Canadian border. Susan, I will admit, I had never heard of Warwood, Minnesota. With a population of nearly 1,700, it is known for 3 things. Hockey. They are called Hockeytown, USA, having sent 6 players to the National Hockey League. Wally, a fish in the perch family, and Marvin Windows and Doors. Lately, the focus of this press for Marvin Company has not been on the stars on the ice, but rather on an American manufacturer who employs approximately 4,300 people, of which 2,000 live in or around Warwood. Established in the Great North Woods and founded by George C. Marvin, Marvin Windows and Doors was as close as it could be to the source of its product material, the white pine. Through the decades, it survived and thrived in a challenging environment of bitter cold and snowy winters until it became one of the largest manufacturers of windows and doors in our country. And then there was the financial crisis of 2008. I choke every time I talk about the crisis of 2008. And there was an entirely different kind of challenge for Marvin Windows. As housing starts fell, guess what also goes, right? Windows and doors. Other businesses were impacted, including Marvin's. But their reaction and response to this drastic plunge was why the New York Times singled them out and other major media networks to look at this family-owned business. Marvin Windows neither laid off workers nor reduced health insurance benefits during these difficult times. They did not do that when so many companies had to do that. How they did it is one side of the story, but why they did it is Susan Marvin's story. A graduate of the University of Minnesota, Susan has been with Marvin Windows and Doors for more than 30 years. She started when she was 5. Before assuming the presidency in 1995, she was the vice president of sales and marketing, and she helped develop many of the signature marketing themes still in use by the company. She serves on the boards of directors for Hormel Foods Corporation and Marvin Lumber and Cedar Company, and has been a past board member of the Minnesota Chamber of Commerce and a University of Minnesota Foundation trustee. She is a member of the World Presidents Organization and Women Corporate Directors. In 2011, Susan was presented with the Distinguished Minnesotan Award by Bemidji State University, and the Minneapolis Star-Tribune named her one of the 10 business newsmakers to watch in 2012. She lives in Warwood and Minneapolis with her husband, Keith. I thought his name was Mark. So now you're now married to a Mark and a Keith. Please welcome Susan Marvin.
Thank you. Don't tell Keith about Mark. It's a real pleasure to be here. It's a very unusual experience for me, and perhaps later I will mention specifically why, but I just want to say what a pleasure it is, and I was absolutely stunned with how beautiful your campus is, and it really is very special to be here, and in no small part because I was asked to speak by Dusty. And much to my surprise, I learned a few years ago that Dusty was coaching a women's basketball team. And I'm like, I don't get it. And then he's on the board of this very fine college. And I had always known him for being a stellar window distributor. Now it was asked, are they our largest? Well, here's what I'll tell you about A.W. Hastings, which, by the way, is also a family company. They have extraordinarily high standards. They add incredible value to our product line. We are never any better than our link to our customer, our distribution channel, and they add incredible value. They lead the industry in many, many ways, and most often with very innovative ideas. They have very sophisticated sales and marketing, and they treat their customers the way every customer would love to be treated. And yes, they are our largest distributor. But when that was asked, I started thinking, and I'm not certain, but I am going to guess that they may be the largest distributor of any windows in the country. I can't think of a larger one. So it is an honor, and I'm very, very happy to accept Dusty's request when he asked if I would speak here. Now, I've channeled my comments around how we've navigated through this recession, but if we have an opportunity for questions at the end, I'd like to invite you to ask any question. It doesn't need to be specific to that topic. Now, Dr. Leary mentioned that I was from Warroad, Minnesota, and I am. And she mentioned it's this very small town on the Canadian border of 1,700 people. Now, if you're familiar with geography at all, and I wish I had a photograph to put up on the screen, there's a little chimney on top of the state of Minnesota, a little bump. It was a surveying error. And that is where Warroad is. It's a town where my grandfather started a lumberyard over a century ago, and where my father built a window company. It's where our corporate headquarters are. We have 10 plants, but the largest is in Warroad. And as Dr. Leary mentioned, we employ over 2,000 there in this town of 1,700. People drive a long way to get to work. And these people have tremendous skills, and they earn a fair wage, and we have good benefits. And it was in Warroad, at our flagship facility, that in April 2009, I stood in front of the employees at our company's plant. They were there to hear a market update. Now, keep in mind that these are people who had been working 32-hour weeks for 12 weeks, because this is in 2009, not too long after Lehman Brothers collapsed and things started to unravel. 32-hour weeks, that's a 20% reduction in take-home pay. There were salaried people in the audience, and they too had their salaries cut. Benefits had been cut, but not health care. Our health care program's very, very good. But regardless, these people were in this audience, and I was there to give a market update, and I'm sure they were hopeful for good news. But instead, I stood in front of them, and I told them there was no improvement in our business. None. And we looked across the United States, and we looked at what was going on in the industry, and there was none on the horizon. There wasn't one metric that would suggest business would improve anytime soon. And this was extraordinarily difficult news to deliver, because it meant to those people in that audience that they would continue to go home with a much smaller paycheck. I'll never forget it, how tough it was. And when I got done, they cheered. And the reason they cheered is because part of the message was, the business isn't there, but your job is. And we will do everything we can to avoid a layoff. And that meant they knew they could count on a paycheck at the end of the week. And equally important, so could the person next to them. It was an amazing moment. This is the worst downturn of our lifetime. And these people were fearing for their future. They'd seen others in businesses cut jobs and close plants. The first 6 months of this recession, 52 window and door plants were closed. The first 6 months. That was, what, 3 years ago? And we stopped counting. Many, many, many more closed after that. Immediately, companies started laying off people. And you know what? The first round of cuts, maybe it's 5% of the workforce, maybe 10. Most window companies, even the leaders in our industry, have gone through 7, 8, or 9 rounds of layoffs. I was talking to a gentleman who works for us who used to work for a competitor, and he had just gotten a call, and this wasn't that long ago. I was walking down the hallway, and he had a gentleman he worked with at this competitor had been there 23 years. He said this guy was good. I mean, he was really good. He was 6 months from being eligible for his pension, and he was cut. And that is not an unusual story in our industry. This is more often the case than not. Whatever this recession was for the economy, it was a depression in the housing industry. We talked about unemployment. Today it's around 8%. I don't care if it's 8.2 or 7.8, it's unacceptably high. And we talk about it at one point it was 10 or maybe 12%. In our industry, it was 30%. It was 30%. And the only reason it went down is because people left our industry to go into other industries. So what I'm going to talk about today is just how we've navigated this depression in the worst economic downturn of my lifetime, and I think of the lifetime of anybody since the Great Depression. And we did it simply by doing what we felt was the right thing. Our family company made an impact on the industry, and we didn't make our decision because of that. We had no clue, but we did it because of those things we thought were the right things. And I think for you to understand that, I'm going to share with you a little bit about this company. And it'll help explain our perspective on the industry and how we make decisions. As mentioned, it was started at the turn of the century. It was a lumberyard, and it was started by my grandfather. He was hired by a Canadian company and sent to Warroad. And he was a very young man. I think he was in his teens. He didn't have a high school education. And he was brought to Warroad to run a lumberyard and an elevator. And he did that. They left, but he stayed, and it became his lumberyard. When the Great Depression hit, he had 8 employees. And I think I should mention, he kept them on the payroll. The business wasn't there, but he kept them on the payroll. In 1938, my father joined the company, and there was a Swedish immigrant who worked for the company who was very industrious and didn't like to sit idle. And he said, Bill, if you buy me a particular type of saw, I'll make window frames and we can sell them in the summer. I'll make them in January and February. There's no busy business, but we can sell them in the summer. And that was how the window business started. Now, during World War II, my father had 4 brothers and a sister. His 4 brothers were in the service. And by the way, yesterday I just coincidentally saw a lighthouse where my Uncle Tut was stationed during the war. And I never thought I was going to see that and didn't plan to, but did. And it was in Connecticut here. It was pretty cool. At any rate, these boys were in the service. And one in Iwo Jima, and one was in the Air Force, and one in the Coast Guard. And my father went to his father and said, Dad, when the boys come home, and the boys were his brothers, but they were also his neighbors and kids he went to school with, when they come home from the war, there's not going to be any jobs for them. And if they don't have jobs here, they're going to be forced to leave home. So we need to find something that divorces us from the local economy. And that something became windows, because we could sell windows outside world. That was how the company came to be, and it is our mission today. Our mission is to provide jobs in the communities where we do business. And how we do it is by building very high quality windows and providing great service. Now, I'm third generation, and I didn't lead this company through this recession. My brothers and I did. I have 4 brothers and a sister, and at one point in time, I worked with all 4 brothers and a sister and my father. Today, I continue to work with 2 brothers and 13 nephews and nieces. We truly are a family business, and the 4th generation is very invested in it. We make wood and clad wood windows made to order, and that in itself could be great speech material. We were the first window company to make windows to order, and quite simply what that meant was the customer would tell us what they wanted and we would build it. Today, that's how window business is done. But when we started doing it, we were doing it before Dell computers. We were doing it before any other company. And it was ingenious, but I don't think anybody told us at Marvin that it was. But it's how we do business. We also pioneered a product called Ultrex. It's a proprietary pultruded fiberglass, and we use that product on our Integrity brands, our Infinity brands, and we introduced a siding called Apex very recently. And this is a material that's fairly new to the building industry. We introduced it about 20 years ago. We were alone with it, but in the last 4 or 5 years, we've seen others bring this kind of material to market in their products. As I mentioned earlier, we have 10 manufacturing plants, but our headquarters is in Warroad. We sell throughout the United States, Canada, international markets such as Europe and China and Japan, and we even sell windows in the Mideast. Our primary market is the luxury, new construction, and remodeling and replacement market. You'll also find a number of Marvin windows in non-residential buildings. I understand there's even some on this campus, thank you. And we're known in our industry to be very, very innovative. Our products are high quality, but they're also very well differentiated, and that is intentional. We have very good delivery, very good quality, we're innovative, and we're known for doing what we say we will. Now, I mentioned that the country went into a recession, and there were 50 million jobs lost across the nation. Unemployment, as I mentioned, was 9%, and construction went into a depression. Just to give you an idea of the magnitude, in 2007, there were 2 million housing starts a year. 2009, there were 500,000. That's a 75% drop. You'll pick up the newspaper today and you'll read that housing is increasing. It sounds like a recovery, but a 20% increase this year means we're still 65% short of where we were. It's not a recovery, it's a slight improvement. Builders failed across the nation. They took suppliers down with them, they took employees, and they took banks. I remember one of the first meetings I was in after this recession hit, there was this builder who was the CEO of an extraordinarily large building company. You would have heard of it. And he quipped, well, my name is so-and-so, and I used to be the CEO of a large building company. Today, I'm the CEO of a very small one. Among window manufacturers, as I said, there were a lot of layoffs, and I've given you the picture. It was pretty nasty. It was as bad as it gets. And yet, we remain committed in our industry to building our future. We're very committed to the housing industry. And it's a business that if you meet people in it, they love it. And it's really a good thing. And it's good that we stick with it, because home building has contributed to 6% of our GDP at a high and 3% at a low. That's huge any way you look at it. It's amazing. And this is an industry of very skilled people. And for those women of you that are majoring in business, this is going to be an industry that needs young, talented people, because during this recession, very few have entered it. And when it does recover, and it will, there's going to be a lack of skill and talent. So just keep that in the back of your minds. At any rate, we provide good jobs, and we offer the satisfaction of building something. We build something very important. We build homes, we build communities, and we build neighborhoods. And if you go to an industry event, and I was at one last night, and I was among architects and builders, there is so much passion and so much pride among people in this industry because they, in fact, do build what is often most important to us, and that is our community. Now, at Marvin, we've been very fortunate. We entered the recession in a real position of strength. We had no debt. We had cash in the bank. We served very diversified markets. We had products in new construction, in replacement, remodeling, and in commercial. Customer satisfaction was at an all-time high, but most important, we were in a strong position because we kept our team intact because there were no layoffs. Now, I often hear CEOs say that people are their most valuable asset. Who hasn't heard that? I'm a member of a number of business groups, and during this time, I also heard these people say, we're cutting people. We're laying people off. And I would sit there and think, why, if people are your most valuable asset, would they be the first thing you would cut? Not the last, but the first. It doesn't make sense. Our people have an abundance of talent. They have experience, they have skill, and this skill is still working for us. And they're designing and producing quality products, and they're providing our customers the best service and the best overall solution. And we're strong and we're stable, and we have gained share because of it. Now, I'll share a little bit with you on why. And it's because we believe in serving our stakeholders. Now, quite simply, our philosophy is if you take care of your customers, if you take care of your employees, and you take care of your community, your shareholders will be just fine. It's fundamental. It really is that simple. And yet, in our business communities across the nation, there's a real casino mentality, and it comes right off of Wall Street. There's a lot of companies geared toward short-term thinking. They're really thinking about that next quarter. And I don't totally get it. Now, I own stock in companies, and in some very fine companies. But if you look at, and you step back and you look at Wall Street in aggregate, you do see this drive for returning, providing returns for shareholders. And that becomes the number one focus. Now think for a minute about who those shareholders are. They are people who are renting the company, maybe for a year, maybe for a month or a week, but often for hours or minutes. So we've got a very large percent of our business community focused on providing a return, number one, above all else, for shareholders who are going to own that company sometimes for minutes. It's just the way it is. And shareholders that are holding it for a minute often don't even know that they're owners in the company. They don't much care about that company, but they want to make a profit in that period of time. And in doing that, they don't add value. I believe that companies that are focused on shareholders first and only are short-term companies. And that our Wall Street sometimes punishes people who plan for and act for the long term. those that have cash on hand or invest in R&D and people are not always rewarded. And sure, there were millions of jobs cut, sadly, often necessarily for the company's survival. And I'll make a comment on that. If we had not had a choice, if it had meant the company's survival, we would have laid off people, because it wouldn't have been good for anybody if we'd gone out of business. So I want to be very clear about that, that often businesses don't have that choice, but many do. I'm part of a business group, and it's called Young Presidents Organization, and by the way, I'm 8 years too old to be in it. But I was in a forum meeting, and when the recession hit, and that you were reading about layoffs across the country, these gentlemen in my forum very quickly and clearly said, we're laying off. And no, we don't need to, but it's a very convenient time to shed non-performers. And I'm going, if you've got non-performers on your payroll, you're not managing your business. But anyway, that's a rabbit trail here. But there were a lot of jobs cut, and sometimes for the company's survival, but often it was for short-term profit, and it came at the expense of workers and communities. And they did it for a few more cents per share today. But when they did it, they watched skill, experience, innovation, and improvement walk out the door. And they often did it at the expense of customers. And I know at Marvin that we could tough it out for a few years and look at the long-term payoff of investing in our people and our communities. And I really think America is hungry for this approach. And that's why there was such an incredible response from the New York Times. I'll never forget when our PR person called me up and said, Susan, if the New York Times wanted to do an article, would you talk to them? And I went, John, if the New York Times wants to do an article, I'll talk to them. And he goes, well, would it be okay if they came to Warroad? And I'm thinking, there is no way in the world. And I said, sure, John, you get them to Warroad. But at any rate, they did. And they came up and they wrote this incredible article. And it was amazing what happened. My phone wouldn't stop ringing. My email box was full. Letters came in the mail, and they came from all over the world. They came from Paris. They came from South Africa. It was amazing, the response. It was amazing. Our web traffic, you know, we got Google Analytics, and you watch the number of hits you get, and I don't know too much about social media. They absolutely spiked. There was incredible interest in this story. And it just kind of blew our minds. And then CNBC called, and Fox called, and Bloomberg called, and on it went. And we were on national TV, and TV business stations, our programmings, never cover small private companies. I mean, you normally watch these stations, and they're talking about public companies, and understandably so. And lo and behold, in December of, was it last year, President Obama is giving a speech in Kansas City to manufacturers, and he tells the story. And we didn't know. We didn't know. We just started getting these calls and letters and eventually figured it out. And then he also referenced it in his acceptance speech. But I will tell you, as overwhelming as that response was, and it really was an indication of what the interest was in this country for this approach, probably the most amazing thing was the response of the employees. And I'll bring you back to that moment when I was speaking to the plant. And instead of people grumbling and whatever, they cheered. And I would walk into the grocery store, and people would come up and hug me. And I'm sure that was true for my brothers and other family members. And I got letters from employees, and they would stop me in the hallway or wherever and just say, thank you. People are really hungry for thoughtful, long-term thinking on these important issues. They're hungry for strengthening our community and improving the lives of our people. Because we believe in serving all our stakeholders, our customers, our employees, and our community, I believe that's why our business is sustainable. Now I'm going to go off script here a little bit and say we've been in business over 100 years. If you look to Europe and you look at privately held companies there, they last centuries. It's core to running a sustainable business. Now today we're focused on transferring the vision, the values, and the culture that enabled us to serve our customers and to stay strong in the most challenging times and prosper in the best. And that means that every decision is made with the long view in time. And we really emphasize the fundamentals. My father always told me that if your customer does well, you'll do well. If you provide quality and you back it up with superior service, people will focus on high value and not low price. So we work to always introduce something innovative or differentiated so our dealers have something special to sell. I mean, this wasn't a case of you keep your employees and things will be okay. We really had to scramble. And we really worked hard to make sure everything we did the last few years had something behind it that we hoped would delight our customers. And there was a real commitment to provide our customers quality and service, and this is only realized because of our commitment to our employees. A layoff would have been a very quick and easy way to cut expenses, but it would have devastated our communities and the families of our employees. There would have been fewer children in our schools, there would have been fewer people in our churches, there would have been fewer customers for local businesses. And while it might have been very easy to lay off people, I know that if skill and experience walked out our door, our customers would suffer because you cannot lose institutional knowledge and not expect it to affect the business. Retention of talent is a very successful business strategy. Now, as I travel the country and I talk to customers, I hear appreciation for the service levels they're getting. I also know I've called on dealers who would say, well, I split my business between Marvin and this other brand, but I'm shifting more to Marvin because the person I worked with is no longer there, or they dropped the ball on this. Retaining talent is a successful business strategy. And ours is a long-term sustainable business strategy because we serve our customers, serve our employees, and do serve our communities, and it is a long view. And it's how we've managed our business for the decades, starting with my grandfather in the Great Depression. And it is why our performance is among the best, if not the best in the industry. And I'll tell you what, we're still challenged. Our sales are still challenged. But every single year of the recession, we've seen customer satisfaction increase. We've seen our Net Promoter Scores increased. And for those of you in the business classes, check that out, Net Promoter Score. And we've seen our market share increase. It works. It is an impactful business strategy. And it would have been really easy at times like this to bury our heads in the sand and wait for the storm to pass. But it's not what we did. We have an obligation to our employees, our communities, and to our future generations. So as you look at your own lives, your careers, and your communities, I hope when you're in business, to the students here, that you consider a path that's not always taken in our society, and that you make decisions with long-term thinking, and you think about serving all your stakeholders. It's a path that might not lead to a quick buck today, but it will pay dividends over the long term, because it's based on the timeless virtues of skill and service and building true value. Not for the benefit of Wall Street gamblers, but for the benefit of everybody. That ends my prepared comments, and I'd love to entertain questions.
If anybody has a question, raise your hand. I have one microphone, and Kathy has another.
One way in the back.
I'm coming.
You have to eat it, don't you? Good morning. Thank you for coming. When I was a project manager at Cornell University, I had to replace windows in a 1912 building. Marvin Windows replaced those. They were specialty windows, but you didn't charge me a specialty price. And I've been a Marvin person ever since. Thank you.
In your presentation, you talked a lot about the stock market and the way people portray it. Is Marvin a public company in the stock market?
No, we're not. We're a privately held, family-owned and managed company. I do want to mention, I was pretty hard on the way we look at investments on Wall Street. I also think it's very important to recognize that there's some extraordinarily responsible companies that are public and do serve our country and their shareholders and their employees well. But sometimes we lose focus and we look for that quarterly dividend and that quick hit. But no, we're private. Wrong answer to the question.
Thank you.
Well, she does that. I should mention, for those of you who do consider careers in business, one of the advantages of being private is you can make some decisions that allow you to look at the long term versus the short term. You really can make long-term decisions without worrying about your shareholders questioning you on the short term. But at any rate, there's a...
Hi, my name is Lynn McCormick. I'm actually a business student here in the MBA program. I own my own company, and I was one of those people laid off at the beginning of 2009. So I can relate to a lot of things you're saying, but something that you said, I see it a lot, was retaining talent.
Yes.
What's your view on that as, like, for all companies? It seems like a pretty big issue. You see it all the time with telecommunications and other kinds of companies. Is that something that you can plan for to kind of replace that talent, or eventually they're going to want to retire as well?
Talent attraction and talent development and talent retention would be right at the top of my list as one of the things a leader in a company needs to focus on above all else. Because our ability to compete and compete effectively has everything to do with who works for us, how effective they are, and our ability to retain them and not lose them elsewhere. And I don't know if that's responsive to your question. In the case of the downturn, I believe we picked up market share because we retained our skill sets and our talent, and because of that, we were able to outservice our customers or our competitors. So I believe retention of talent in that case was a successful market strategy. I will also tell you that as the market came back, and the rest of the economy, not in the building industry, but in other facets of business, our number one concern was losing top talent to other businesses. And it remains a concern today. So we work very hard to provide both a culture and a wage and benefit package that enables us to keep them. And honestly, well, you have to have a fair wage and benefits. What's really key to attracting and keeping people is the environment you give them to work in. And most specifically, the thing that matters the most is their leadership, their supervisors. And I don't know if that's specific to where you were going with your question, but attraction and retention of talent is number one on just about every business person's list. Was I responsive to your question, or did you have something else in mind? Pardon me? Oh, okay.
There's many books written about family-owned businesses.
Yeah.
I wondered how you and the management and the differences between them, how did you and your brothers and your father solve your differences of opinion on what to do?
You know, I do have an answer for that. Normally the glib one I give is when people say, how does your family work together? And I'll go, pretty much like a family. But, and there's a lot of truth to that. And so just like in any business, you have things you agree on, things you disagree on, and you have different personalities and ambitions, et cetera. But the success in the business, I think, is because it's, again, some things we do that are a little different than a lot of businesses. First of all, we've made it a requirement that if you're going to own stock in the company, you need to work for the business by the age of 33. If you don't work for the business full-time by the age of 33, you need to sell your stock. What that means is your shareholders are very invested in the business. That leads us to the second reason, or whatever, that we're able to get along and make decisions and work effectively together. We're all focused on the same goal, and that is the success of the business. And whenever there's a really divisive type of issue, you know, something people are very passionate about and emotional about, and they don't see things the same, what we do is we go, okay, in the end, really truly, what is absolutely the best thing for the business? And what you need to do as a shareholder and as an executive is put yourself aside and focus on the goal. And you just go, this is bigger than me. This isn't about me. This is about something much more important. And because we do that, we're always able to reach a consensus. We've never had a hurdle we couldn't overcome. Oh.
Thank you, Susan. I like your priorities of customers, employees, and community. I would love to hear your comments about your leadership in an industry as a woman that's in an industry that's probably pretty male-dominated.
I think that I said this was a very unique or different experience for me, but I didn't say why. And the reason why is because of the number of women in this audience. This may be one of the few audiences where, I don't know what the percent is, where at least half, if not more, of the audience has been female. My entire life, I've walked into rooms where I've been often the only female. And today I'll walk into a room, and if I'm speaking to 100 people in the business, anywhere from, unlike when I started where there were no women, now there'll be between 5 and at tops 10% female in our industry. Certainly in the executive ranks in our company, it's male dominated. And I can't even, I guess what I'm doing is I'm trying to give you a picture of just how male dominated. It was 1 to 2% women builders and architects for years, and with dealers and distributors even less, and today it's, I think, between 5 and 10%. I love the industry, and while I have anecdotes that would curl your hair if you really step back, it's been a fabulous industry for me to be a part of. And I was talking to Dusty about it last night, and I said, I think it worked because I was oblivious to it. I don't think I appreciated the fact that it was a gender imbalance in our business until until very recently. I think the first time it came to my attention was a person I was working with was making arrangements for a meeting we were having. And she said, she had the guest list, she goes, Susan, does it ever rattle you to walk in the room and be the only woman? And I go, am I? and then that brought it to my attention, and I've thought more purposefully about it since. But I was oblivious. I also told Dusty I missed out on a lot because of that too. That meant I wasn't very tuned in to people the way I could have and should have been. And I missed subtleties that others wouldn't have missed. And you know, so there was pros and cons. But it's a wonderful industry. And not to rabbit trail too much, the other comment I'd make about being a woman in business, often it served you well. I have had so many opportunities in my life because I was the only woman in the room. There's the obvious thing, like you walk into a room of 100 people and you're one woman, within 5 minutes everybody knows your name, but you might not know theirs. What that meant was sometimes when they're forming committees or voting for directors or something, they'd write in the only name they knew. I had opportunities, like I was on the board of the Minnesota Chamber of Commerce, and at that time it was a very 40 to 60-year-old white male organization. And I know they invited me to be on the board because they wanted a businesswoman. Within a year, I was on their executive committee, and a couple years later, I was their chair. Was I the most qualified? I don't think so. But people were looking for opportunities to forward the careers of women. They were looking for opportunities to open doors and, you know, to break that proverbial ceiling. And because I was there, I got those opportunities. Now, with that comes a responsibility, because you aren't, or I wasn't at least back 20 years ago or 30 years ago, wasn't always the most qualified. And I knew that, and I was very, it caused me a lot of anxiety, because I'd go, geez, there's somebody who could do this better. But with that invitation to step forward came a responsibility to step forward. Because if I did, then maybe it would be easier for my niece. And it is. The other responsibility that comes forward is you have to try and work your very best to do a good job so that next person does get an opportunity. So I guess in the end I succeeded initially because I was oblivious. And ultimately I got an awful lot of opportunities because of it. It's been wonderful. I would encourage any woman in this room to pursue a career in the building industry. I mean, think about it. You know, you're not trading paper or selling a service. You really, truly are building something.
Hi. You mentioned how you balance family life, well, how you work with your family in the business, but I was wondering how you balance family life outside of work with a job that requires so much time and focus, you know.
What was family like outside of work?
Yeah, like how did you balance that? How did you manage?
Yeah, that's a great question. First of all, with 4 brothers and a sister and them marrying and procreating, we had a very large family. And up until a couple years ago, when my parents passed away, we spent every major holiday together. Christmas, Easter, 4th of July, Thanksgiving, we all came together. And I don't know that it was ever articulated, but we had a rule, which was when we're not in the office, we don't talk business. And I think we interacted and interfaced very much like any family would. There'd be teasing, there might be fighting, there might be, you know, discourse of all types, and there were games and fun, but we didn't talk about business at family gatherings. With my parents gone, one of the things I miss most is we're less likely to get together. Other people go away on vacation, they have their own family units, so there's less of that. But we still get together as a family, and we don't talk business.
Susan, you touched on the fact that the economic downturn had a great impact on new construction housing startups. How much of an impact did the replacement segment of your production help with the company's sustainability and job retention?
There's absolutely no question that because we had a presence in remodeling, replacement, historic preservation, and in commercial, we probably felt it, we were buffered a bit in a way our competitors weren't. But having said that, the entire construction industry had a decline. So while new construction might have declined 75%, maybe replacement and remodeling declined 30, 40, or 50%. So it did decline, but not quite as deeply. And that did help buffer the impact to some degree. But it's still been jarring, and it still is. It's still really a challenge. But it helped. So, thank you.
You to stay up here. This has to be one of the most extraordinary presentations, question and answer periods we have ever had in our 10-year anniversary of this program. I think what you represent, and especially for our women business students, is someone who matches the theme of Bay Path for this year. And the theme is leading with compassion. You did not use the word specifically, Susan, but that really, for me, was what I was listening to through all the lessons that you taught this entire audience, that you do have a company that leads with compassion, and they are so fortunate to have a CEO like you. You did a marvelous job for us today, and I can't thank you enough for being at Bay Path College. Thank you so much.
It's an honor.
Great job. And we do have our famous sweatshirt for Susan that we'll give her, and we have to give you bright pink because I think our audience has seen our billboards on 91. They're beautiful pink and blue billboards, but we want you to know that this was an absolutely extraordinary presentation with business lessons for each one of us to take away today. So thank you very, very much. I thank you as an audience. You have been wonderfully patient with listening to me brag about Bay Path, and I do have one more thing to tell you. I want you to not only plan to be back here next year for our Innovators Lecture Series, but I hope you'll put March 22nd on your calendar for the Women's Professional Development Conference, our leadership conference in downtown Springfield at the Mass Mutual Center. Our Vice President Karen Hoban and Brianna Sittler are the co-directors of this program, and I know that we will bring you extraordinary speakers in the spring, and we hope that you'll come back. But have a great fall. We have a lot to be thankful for, all of us in this room, at Thanksgiving this year, despite the recession and some improvement in our economy. I think we have so many blessings, our family, our friends, and our community. So we thank you, have a wonderful fall, and we'll see you not only next year, but at the Women's Leadership Conference. Thank you so much.